Hi, this is Jonathan Larson with TYT Politics. One of the largest medical device companies in the world has been making claims about Obamacare that appear to be undercut by its own financial filings and other documents reviewed by TYT Politics. Stryker CEO Kevin Lobo has made multiple appearances on national television talking about the negative impact that Obamacare has had on his company and on the entire industry, but those statements appear to conflict with statements he and other Stryker executives have made to Wall Street analysts. According to Lobo, his big issue with Obamacare, and therefore the reason he wants it repealed, is the medical device tax, which was included in Obamacare and which was suspended a year and a half ago by Obama and Congress for a 2-year period. That suspension, however, would be made permanent by the Republican American Health Care Act. That's a repeal that Lobo wants to see happen. Specifically, Lobo has said on national television that the tax has killed jobs in the industry and has killed innovation.
So basically, the tax really is a job killer. It's an innovation killer.
Right, but what did Congress do? Congress
decided to suspend.
Did Obama sign it?
Yep, it had bipartisan support just for suspension for a 2-year period. But what we look forward to with the new administration is actually a full repeal, which has been talked about.
It's not just Lobo's public statements about Obamacare. The company is actively working on Capitol Hill to try to get the medical device tax repealed and presumably to get the American Health Care Act passed. For one thing, Stryker has spent $50,000 on lobbying in the first quarter of this year. They're lobbying on a lot of different issues, but the lobbying form does specifically list repeal of the medical device tax. So we know they've been lobbying on that. Furthermore, Stryker is a member of the Advanced Medical Technology Association, also known as AdvaMed. And AdvaMed has been doing a lot more lobbying. They've paid 3 separate lobbying firms just in the first quarter of this year, $160,000 lobbying on issues including both the American Health Care Act generally, but also the medical device tax specifically. Lobo, the CEO of Stryker, has donated approximately $20,000 to AdvaMed since he became CEO of Stryker, and he sits on the group's board of directors. AdvaMed actually made national headlines in March when they became one of the very few medical organizations to endorse the American Health Care Act. Here's what they said. They said they were urging passage of it, quote, so we can continue the push to end this tax, that's the medical device tax, once and for all, unquote. But Stryker's claims about the jobs impact of the medical device tax began to shift and even contradict themselves even before the tax took effect. On November 10th, 2011, they issued a press release. This was 1 year before the tax was even going to go into effect. The press release said that Stryker was going to lay off 5% of its global workforce. They had about 22,000 employees at the time worldwide. So they were going to lay off 5% of their workforce. That was according to their November 10th, 2011 press release. The same day, however, they submitted a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission about that planned layoff. And the SEC, as you may know, has very strict requirements about the veracity of the statements that you make to them. And here's what they said about those layoffs in that SEC filing. They said, quote, these actions are being initiated to provide efficiencies and realign resources following recent acquisitions to allow for continued investment in strategic areas in an ongoing challenging economic environment and market slowdown in elective procedures. Nowhere in the filing did they mention Obamacare or the medical device tax. Then there's what we learned about the rate of the tax. Now, when the tax was first announced, it was described as being a 2.3% tax, meaning every time you bought an artificial hip or whatever, you were going to have to pay 2.3%, assuming the company didn't absorb the cost. So 2.3% was the number that was out there. However, what you didn't often hear was that that tax was deductible, meaning the company could deduct the cost of paying for that tax. So when you factored in the fact that it was deductible, the effective tax rate, the real tax rate, was only 1.5%. It gets better. In its 2013 annual report, Stryker wrote the following about what it paid for the tax. Quote, the medical device excise tax was 0.9% of sales in the current year. That was the first year that the tax was in effect. However, that year and afterwards, the company continued to refer to the tax rate not as 1.5%, not as 0.9%, but at that 2.3% rate. Then there's AdvaMed, the industry trade group. Now at the time, and consistently since then, they pointed to a study that said that 43,000 jobs would be lost in the industry due to the medical device tax. However, one thing you should know about that study is it was funded by AdvaMed. Furthermore, in 2015, 2 years later, a report by the Congressional Research Service said that, quote, probably no more than 1,200 employees should lose their jobs in the entire industry. Today, right now, AdvaMed is still claiming that 29,000 jobs were lost. That's down considerably from their initial claim of 43,000, but they're still claiming 29,000 jobs were lost. And they're claiming that if the tax is repealed permanently, 53,000 jobs will either be created or saved. Stryker CEO Lobo, in that CNBC appearance on national television, called the medical device tax an innovation killer. However, consistently, ever since the tax's implementation, he and other executives on their quarterly conference calls with Wall Street analysts repeatedly referred to innovation as a strength of Stryker's moving forward. They increased spending on research and development and engineering by just 2% in the year before the tax went into effect. However, in the first year of the tax, their R&D spending increased 13.8%, rising from $471 million to $536 million. And in the total 3 years that the tax was in effect, the average rate of increase for their spending on R&D was 10.1%. In his earnings call for the fourth quarter of 2013, Lobo said, quoting now, "Our ongoing investments in R&D, as well as our targeted M&A, that's mergers and acquisitions, positions us well to deliver innovation to our hospital customers." This was the first year of the implementation of the tax that he later called an innovation killer. Lobo has said that the company lost $100 million based on the implementation of the tax. So it's important to keep that in context with what it still had money to spend on during the years the tax was in effect. Let's start with acquisitions. In 2013, they spent $2.32 billion on acquisitions, buying other companies. In 2014, they spent $916 million on acquisitions. In 2015, they spent $153 million on acquisitions. Remember, the total cost of the tax, they said, was $100 million to the company. But it wasn't just acquisitions, it was also dividends to shareholders. The year before the tax hit, they paid their shareholders $324 million in dividends. In 2013, the year the tax hit them, they gave their shareholders $401 million in dividends. The next year, $462 million in dividends. The next year after that, 2015, $521 million in dividends. This was all while they were complaining that the medical device tax was costing them $100 million a year. Plus, there were stock buybacks. This is where a company buys its own stock back to increase the value of the stock. Over the 3 years that the tax was in effect, costing them $100 million, remember, Stryker bought back a total of $1.17 billion of its own stock. During this same period, the amount of cash that Stryker reported on its federal filings increased from $1.4 billion before the tax went into effect to $3.4 billion when the tax was suspended. Stryker did not respond when we asked them to comment on our story. It's not that Stryker or Lobo or any of the other executives involved are trying to pull something or are unique in the industry. The point is that there are lots of companies that routinely make claims like this about policy, not just including the medical device tax, but also Obamacare and other policies that have broad social goods and whose benefits the companies will actually benefit from over the long run, certainly, but they don't see those. And so what we get is we get these statements about how these things are bad because it might cost them money. Meanwhile, they're telling Wall Street, hey, we're in great shape. And you know what? They are.